Hello, and how are you this lovely
Saturday evening?
Now, I know that I didn't do my normal intro stuff. I usually flip the camera around and all. You might not have noticed that I do that, but I do that every day since like a few weeks in. Anyways, today is kind of an interesting day. And I know it's another city talky type of vlog, but it's because today is the 20th anniversary of Pokémon. Yes, on February 27th, 1996, Pokémon Red and Green released in Japan. So, because of that, today I'm going to take the time to talk a little bit about it. Now see, Pokemon is a worldwide phenomenon, spanning movies, anime, trading card games, even Pop-Tarts at one point. And it all started from those two Game Boy RPGs. But the real question that comes up because of this is, do those games hold up? Did they stand the test of time? And so, because of that, today I'm going to be doing a Pokemon Generation 1 review. Now, just to briefly explain Pokemon for any of you who are completely unaware of how it works and are just watching this video because you really like the cut of my jib for whatever reason. Pokemon are unique RPGs based in a fictional world that is based off of Japan, wherein animals are replaced by magical creatures called Pokemon, or pocket monsters is the original Japanese name of them. And the basic idea of the RPG is you are tasked with collecting all the different Pokemon. In the original generation there were 151 available to you, not all necessarily in-game legitimately, but 151 Pokemon available. And so the point is you use these Pokemon to explore the region and battle strong trainers and ultimately become a Pokemon Master, i.e. having defeated the strongest trainers in the land and caught as many of the Pokemon as humanly possible. Now for the purpose of the review, I'm going to be focusing on three major aspects of the game. The creatures themselves, obviously important, the region and the story, again, also pretty self-explanatory, and the battle mechanics. We'll go into detail about those last. Now, first and foremost, the Pokemon. The original 151 are widely varied creatures, and honestly, there aren't any designs that I particularly dislike. For the most part, they're very, very simple, which I feel is one of their strengths. There are a lot of modern designs that are fancy and flashy and all over the place, whether it's a chandelier or some ice cream, or my personal favorite newer Pokemon, Stunfisk. But with all these flashy designs, you might think that older, simple, really more basic animal-based designs might not hold up that well. However, I would argue that the simple designs is actually one of their biggest strengths. Modern designs being flashy and over the top kind of distance you from the reality of the Pokemon world. Obviously Pokemon is fake, but in order to suspend disbelief you need a couple things grounding you in reality, and I feel like simple Pokemon designs are one of the best things that are able to do that. And I don't really have a particular grading system for each aspect of the game that I'm going to be focusing on, so I'll just go ahead and say that the original 151 Pokemon get a good enough out of 10. Now for the region and the story. Kanto as a region is kind of bland, if I'm being completely honest. The major locations you'll encounter are city, bigger city, forest, cave. There's not really a whole lot of variation in the types of environments you'll be encountering and exploring in, partly due to the fact that technical constraints of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color meant that there were really only so many possible things that could be stored in a game's memory. This means assets were needing to be reused all over the place, so there were actually only a few unique building facades possible, only a few different designs for trees, and so on and so forth. I don't dislike Kanto as a region, but the fact of the matter is, everything kind of feels unalive. I know that it is based off of a region in Japan, so possibly if I were to visit that region, then it would make a little bit more sense and be a little bit more interesting to me, but the fact of the matter is, my Western sensibilities just kind of think Kanto's alright. And as for the story is very much what it needs to be. You're going on a quest to collect Pokemon, you fight some strong trainers along the way, there's a criminal organization using Pokemon for personal profit. It's all very basic RPG type stuff, but with a little bit of Pokemon flair added in. But it doesn't really take any risks like we've seen in future generations, specifically Gen 5, my personal favorite. I might talk about that some other time. So the region and the story get a okay out of 10. Now for the battle mechanics. Pokemon is what is known as a rock, paper, scissors type RPG. Every creature has a type, and every move that they use also has a type. Basically, some types are more powerful against other types. For instance, the main three starters are fire, water, and grass type, Water is super effective against fire, fire is super effective against grass, and grass is super effective against water. Now, back in the day, that was a pretty good system to base your battles on. The fact of type alignments and covering your weaknesses and trying to have a general balance of what you're trying to cover. However, a lot of things in the battle system didn't exactly work as intended. Psychic types were egregiously overpowered by virtue of the fact that their weaknesses basically either had no moves or were bugged so that they were actually not very effective against them. Critical hits are essentially you have a chance of doing double damage and ignoring all negative stat changes. However, they were bugged so that if your speed stat was high enough, then a high critical hit ratio move would essentially be a guaranteed crit, meaning Pokemon like Persian and Venusaur were able to abuse their speed stats to get bonus damage out the wazoo. Moves like Wrap and Fire Spin were actually working as intended, but they completely negated the opponent's ability to make any moves, meaning that if you had a fast enough Pokemon that had access to one of these moves, you could essentially nullify the entire enemy team for free. Fact of the matter is, if you go down a list of things that were not working as intended in the original battle system, you'll be there for a while, quite frankly. And I have to give them some slack because they were the first people to really be doing this sort of thing. Not that RPGs were anything new. I mean, the Super Nintendo, which came out years before the Game Boy, had plenty of amazing RPGs on it. But Generation 1 being the first Pokemon games, they really hadn't figured out exactly what it was that they were trying to do yet, and so bugs were essentially unavoidable. I'm willing to cut them some slack, but the fact of the matter is, Generation 1 had a lot of bugs and a lot of just general problems with it, mechanics-wise. And so, for that reason, I'm gonna have to kind of give the mechanics a broken out of 10. Now, for everything I've said about it so far, you can probably tell that I have a generally positive opinion of the original Pokemon games. I don't really have anything against them, but if I had to list all of the generations from my least favorite to my most favorite, fact of the matter is, Generation 1 would probably be pretty close to the bottom. I'm a firm believer that each new generation of Pokemon improves upon the last in some way or another, whether it's just in terms of visual fidelity or just in terms of game mechanics. Things get updated and refreshed and made more interesting to new audiences. So, quite frankly, I feel that if you've never played a Pokemon game before, Generation 1 really isn't a good starting point. I would recommend starting with one of the newest generation of games, and you might think that with so many new characters, there's no way you'll possibly be able to pick it up. But the game, while some might accuse it of holding your hand for the entire adventure, the game has a very good way of easing you into the experience and only exposing you to so many different creatures at a time so that you can learn the mechanics and learn your Pokemon's strengths and weaknesses over time. And I know there are a lot of you out there who think that Gen 1 is the best generation, and you're entitled to that opinion. However, for the purpose of this review, I'm just going to go ahead and say, Generation 1 isn't the worst. It was the first, and it got a lot wrong, but it got enough right that it was elevated to the position that it's in today. And that's pretty much my entire thoughts on Pokemon Generation 1. Please leave a comment below to let me know what your personal favorite generation is. Like I've said, I'm pretty sure mine is Generation 5. And just go ahead and talk about your feelings about Gen 1 in particular. And I know that a lot of people who watch my videos don't really care that much about Pokemon, so thank you very much for getting to this point. If you are among those people, and I know that this might seem like the biggest, geekiest thing in the world to you, but the fact of the matter is, Pokemon is one of the biggest franchises of anything in existence. And it's important to a lot of people, and I am among them. But that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I guess I will see you tomorrow.